Does anyone here speak Mandarin? Anyone? Patricia Wexler was already moving before she finished the sentence, heels cracking against the polished floor of the Calgary headquarters lobby, scrolling through her phone for any name, any number. Anyone who could fix this before 2 o'clock. The deal was worth $2 billion and it was 20 minutes from dying. Anyone? Nobody answered. A voice came from behind the recycling bin she was emptying. Quiet even. I can help. I speak Mandarin. Patricia turned around and looked at the woman holding the trash bag, work gloves still on, a faded company vest over a flannel shirt, 63 years old with gray hair pulled back under a baseball cap that had gone soft with washing. You? Patricia's voice cracked with something close to a laugh. You clean the parking garage. Do you understand what's happening in that boardroom right now? Do you understand what $2 billion even looks like? Get back to your cart before someone sees you standing here. The woman lowered her eyes and stepped back. The investor, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Liang Zhao, had already stood up from the table 14 floors above. He reached for his coat. But the woman wasn't finished. She walked toward the elevator, caught it just before the doors closed, and said one sentence to the man inside that made him stop completely still, hand on the door frame, staring at her like he was seeing a person for the first time. What did she say to him? We'll get there. But first you need to understand how a woman who pushes a cleaning cart through a parking garage in downtown Calgary ended up being the only person in that entire building who could speak the language fluently enough to save $2 billion. You need to go back 5 hours to a morning that started like every other morning of her life had started for the last 11 years, invisible. Her name was Eleanor Whitfield, and at 6:40 that morning, she was alone on sub-level 3 of the parkade, dragging a mop bucket past a row of luxury cars that cost more than she'd earned in the last 4 years combined. Through the stairwell door, propped open by a fire extinguisher, she could hear voices echoing down from the loading dock above. A delegation had arrived early, 6 men and 2 women, all in dark suits, stepping carefully around the oil stains like the concrete itself might be contagious. A young interpreter, maybe 26, stood between 2 of the executives, translating in quick, clipped phrases. Eleanor wasn't trying to listen. But the words came down the stairwell clear as anything, and she understood every one of them, the way you understand your own name being called in a crowded room. The lead investor, Mr. Zhao, was raising a concern about board representation after the merger. Who would hold real authority? Who would simply hold a title? It was the kind of question that decides whether a deal lives or dies. And when the interpreter answered for him, something in the sentence went soft. The edges disappeared. What came out was a vague comment about scheduling flexibility going forward. That was not what the man had said. Not even close. Eleanor's hand tightened on the mop handle. Her eyes narrowed the way they used to when she caught one of her students switching out a wrong answer on a test 40 years ago. In a different life, in a classroom in Winnipeg that nobody who worked at this company had ever heard of. She kept mopping. Who was going to listen to a 63-year-old cleaner with a name tag that said Building Services? She finished sub-level 3 and rolled her cart toward the freight elevator. The smell of bleach and cold concrete followed her the whole way up. At noon, she sat by herself in the staff break room on the 2nd floor, a thermos of barley soup in front of her, going cold because she'd forgotten about it again. On the cracked screen of an old phone her granddaughter had handed down to her 2 Christmases ago, a podcast was playing, not in English. A panel of 3 lawyers in Beijing, discussing the language of cross-border acquisition contracts, dense and fast, the kind of program meant for law students, not for a woman who'd spent the last decade pushing a cart through a downtown office tower. She mouthed along under her breath. Every few minutes she'd pause it, pick up a pen, and write something in a small spiral notebook, with a cover so worn the cardboard showed through at the corners. If you flipped through that notebook, you would not believe what you were looking at. Page after page in 4 different scripts. Mandarin characters in tight, careful rows, French verb conjugations crossed out and rewritten, a section of Tagalog she'd picked up from a coworker named Imelda, who used to clean offices with her years ago before retiring back to Manila, and in the very back, half a page of Cantonese, abandoned but not erased. Nobody at Holloway Tower knew this notebook existed. Nobody had ever asked Eleanor Whitfield what she did with her evenings. She finished her soup, clocked back in, and pushed her cart toward the executive floor to empty bins before the 2 o'clock meeting. Outside a corner office with the door cracked open, she saw a stack of papers left on the printer tray. Somebody from legal had printed them and walked away mid-task. The English draft of the governance clause. She shouldn't have looked. She looked anyway, because her eyes had already caught the word control, 3 times in 2 paragraphs, and something about that word, written that many times in that short a space, made her stomach turn cold. She read it in under 90 seconds, full clarity. The English version said joint board authority, shared governance, equal voice. But upstairs, what the interpreter had been telling the Chinese delegation all morning used language that meant something else entirely. Full operational transfer, no shared authority, no real voice at all. 2 completely different contracts sitting on the same table, and neither side knew it. Eleanor set the papers back exactly where she'd found them and kept walking, because what else could she do? She had no title, no degree anyone in this building would recognize, and a coworker upstairs, a younger man named Trevor Hask, who managed the maintenance crew, who'd told her just last week that people like her weren't paid to have opinions, just paid to empty bins quietly and not be noticed doing it. At 1:10, in the staff corridor near the loading dock, she overheard one of the younger delegates on the phone, agitated, talking fast to someone back in Shanghai. He was saying the interpreter kept softening things, that the lead investor was losing patience, that if it kept going this way, Mr. Zhao would simply walk. 3 feet away, Eleanor was wiping down a glass partition, and her cloth slowed on the surface, because every word of it landed clean in her ears. A second delegate approached the first one and asked, in Mandarin, where the nearest washroom was. Eleanor didn't plan what happened next. It simply came out of her, the way the right answer comes out of you before you decide to say it. She pointed down the hallway and answered in clear, unhurried Mandarin. Second door past the elevators on your left. 4 seconds. That was all. Both men went still. The younger one lowered his phone slowly, looked at Eleanor's vest, looked at the spray bottle clipped to her belt, looked back at his colleague. Under his breath, almost too quiet to hear, he said something that made his colleague's eyebrows lift halfway up his forehead. Eleanor didn't wait to see what they made of it. She picked up her bucket and walked away at the same steady pace she always walked, heart going harder than it had in years, refusing to let her face show a single thing. Behind her, the younger delegate pulled out his phone again, a different call this time, and dialed a number with his thumb moving fast. You might think, well, it was only directions. 4 seconds, no big deal. But in a room where $2 billion is on the table, trust isn't built from contracts or PowerPoint slides. It's built from the small, unscripted moment when someone finally feels understood, not just translated, understood. That 4-second sentence didn't just give a man directions to a washroom. It told him that somewhere in this building, someone actually knew what he was saying. And after a whole morning of being smoothed over and softened, that mattered more than any clause in any contract. Upstairs, in the private lounge reserved for the delegation, Mr. Zhao took a phone call and went quiet, listening. His expression didn't change much, but something behind his eyes did. Patricia Wexler saw it happen from across the lobby, Eleanor standing near the glass partition, the 2 delegates nodding, relaxed, actually smiling at something she'd said. They looked more at ease with a 63-year-old cleaner than they had with her entire client relations team all morning. Patricia's stomach dropped, and not from admiration. She crossed the lobby in 6 fast steps, heels striking the marble like gunfire, and didn't wait for the delegates to step away before she said it. What exactly do you think you're doing? Eleanor turned. They asked me a question, ma'am. You what? Playing translator? You think because you picked up a few phrases somewhere, you get to stand here chatting with our most important clients? Patricia's voice dropped lower, sharper, the kind of quiet that cuts worse than shouting ever could. Let's be very clear. You empty bins, you mop floors. That is the entirety of your job description, and you are not, under any circumstances, to speak to anyone above the lobby level again. If I hear your name mentioned anywhere near this account, I will see to it personally that you never clean another office building in this city. Eleanor's knuckles went white around the handle of her cart. Around them, nobody in the lobby said a word. The front desk staff stared hard at their monitors. A man reading the paper near the window lowered it slightly, frowned and said nothing. Eleanor said, almost in a whisper, "Yes, ma'am," and walked to the service elevator. The doors closed, and there, alone, with nobody watching, she finally let her hands shake. She looked down at the ring on her left hand. Not her wedding ring, that one she'd buried with her husband Walter 6 years ago, but the smaller one, beside it, plain silver. Her mother's, the only thing she had left after the house fire that took everything else when Eleanor was 19. She closed her eyes and whispered the thing her mother used to say to her every single night while braiding her hair before bed. Back in a small house outside Brandon, Manitoba, where the wind never stopped and the winters came early. A language is the one thing nobody can take out of your hands. Her voice cracked halfway through saying it. She opened her notebook to a page near the back, a folded slip of paper tucked inside. The rejection letter from when she'd applied, 3 years ago, for a front desk position at this very building. This role requires a professional communication background, it said. She'd kept it folded in that notebook ever since, like a wound she refused to let close all the way. She turned the page and found, in her own handwriting from that same week 3 years ago, 3 words. Maybe she's right. She stared at it a long moment. Then she crossed it out with one firm line and closed the notebook. 3 floors below, a man named Harold Bishop, the building's general manager, was reviewing the morning's briefing notes when something nagged at him. The interpreter's written summaries didn't match the tone of his own notes from sitting in on the morning session. He flagged it mentally and moved on, because the meeting was in less than an hour and he had 4 other emergencies on his desk. He shouldn't have moved on. Eleanor sat alone in the small staff room behind the loading dock, notebook closed in front of her, staring at the wall when a woman appeared in the doorway. Marjorie Dunleavy had worked the front desk at Holloway Tower for 19 years. She knew every tenant by name, every delivery driver's coffee order, every superstition the building's old elevator had about Mondays. She'd been looking for Eleanor for 10 minutes. She sat down across from her without asking. The gentleman in suite 1140, the one from Leon, he called down to the desk a few minutes ago. Eleanor looked up. He wanted to know who left the note in French on his welcome packet correcting the typo in his itinerary. Said the handwriting was lovely. Asked for a name. Marjorie paused. I gave him yours. Eleanor stared at her. In 11 years, nobody had ever asked the front desk for her by name. Marjorie's eyes drifted to the open notebook on the table. 4 scripts crowding the page. How many languages do you actually speak, Eleanor? Eleanor didn't answer the question directly, but something in her loosened, just slightly. Maybe because Marjorie was the first person all day who'd asked instead of ordered. She told her everything. The mistranslated clause, the interpreter softening every sharp word into something harmless. The fact that 2 sides of the table thought they were signing 2 entirely different deals, and neither one knew it. Marjorie listened without interrupting once. Then she said, You have to tell Mr. Bishop. Eleanor shook her head. Mrs. Wexler made it very clear what happens if I... Eleanor. Marjorie's voice was calm, but it didn't bend. I've worked in this building 19 years. Harold Bishop is the only manager I've ever met who actually listens before he decides anything. If what you're telling me is true, and I believe every word, he will hear you out. She leaned forward. Patricia can fire you for speaking up. But if you stay quiet, you'll be firing a piece of yourself every single day for the rest of your life. and nobody will even notice it happening. The room went still. Eleanor looked down at her notebook, at the crossed-out line on the back page. Maybe she's right. She picked up her pen and, beneath it, on a blank line, wrote nothing, just closed the book and stood up. "Which floor is Mr. Bishop's office on?" Marjorie smiled, the first real smile of the whole day. "Third floor, end of the hall, and I'm coming with you." 10 minutes before the meeting on the third floor, Harold Bishop's assistant stood up fast to block the doorway. "He's prepping for the 2 o'clock. No interruptions." "She has information that's critical to that meeting," Marjorie said, not moving an inch. "I've worked here 19 years. I'm vouching for her personally." The assistant looked at Marjorie, then at Eleanor, the work vest, the spray bottle still clipped to her belt, then back at Marjorie. 19 years carries a certain weight in a building like this. He stepped aside. Eleanor walked in alone. Harold looked up from his desk, didn't ask why a cleaner was standing in his office, didn't reach for the phone to call security. He set his pen down and waited. Eleanor spoke fast, clear, no wasted words. Explained the mistranslated governance clause, the gap between the English contract and the version the delegation had been hearing all morning, laid it out the way a lawyer lays out a closing argument. Harold turned his laptop around and pointed to a paragraph in the Mandarin draft. "What does this actually say?" Eleanor read it aloud. "Live without a single hesitation. Fluent. Legally precise. Every term landing exactly where it should." Harold sat back slowly, picked up his phone, and revoked the interpreter's access for the rest of the afternoon. Then he stood, came around the desk, and looked her directly in the eye. "I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. If I walk you into that boardroom, in front of the board, in front of Mr. Zhao, in front of $2 billion, and it falls apart because of something you say or don't say, are you prepared to carry that?" The room went silent except for the hum of the vents. Eleanor didn't look at the floor. Yes, one word. No conditions. Harold held her gaze 3 full seconds. The corner of his mouth lifted, just barely. "Good. Because if you'd said anything less than that, I wouldn't have believed you could actually do it." He opened the door and walked out beside her. Not in front, not behind. Beside her. He didn't offer her a blazer to change into. She walked into that hallway in the same work vest she'd had on all morning, because what she carried had never been about the uniform. The hallway leading to the boardroom had marble underfoot and brass fixtures on the walls, the kind of corridor built to remind people of their place. Harold's leather shoes clicked sharp and even against the stone. Eleanor's work boots were quiet, worn soft at the soles, the sound of someone who was never meant to be walking down this particular hall. "My father drove a delivery truck for 31 years, Harold said, not looking at her, eyes fixed ahead. "Same route, same streets. He used to say he knew more about this city than anyone who'd ever sat behind a desk in it." He paused. "He would have liked you." Eleanor said quietly, "My mother used to say something close to that, about the people nobody bothers to look at twice." They reached the boardroom doors. Through the frosted glass, shapes moved, voices murmured low and tense. Harold put his hand on the door. "Ready?" She nodded. He pushed it open. The boardroom was all glass and dark wood. The Calgary skyline stretched out behind floor-to-ceiling windows, 12 leather chairs, water glasses untouched in a perfect row. On one side sat the company's executives, Patricia Wexler upright with her jaw set hard. On the other, the delegation, 6 men and 2 women in tailored suits. And at the far end, Mr. Zhao, arms folded, the look of a man who had already decided to leave. The door opened. Every head turned. Patricia shot up out of her chair so fast it cracked against the wall. "Harold, what is this? She's a cleaner." "I told her explicitly not to." "Patricia." Harold didn't even look at her. "Sit down or leave the room. Your choice." Dead silence. Patricia looked around the table for someone, anyone, to back her up. Nobody did. She sat. Mr. Zhao rose to his feet and spoke, sharp and fast, listing every grievance, the watered-down translations, the sense that nobody on this side of the table had respected him enough to hear what he was actually saying. He finished with 5 flat words. "We are leaving. It's over." He reached for his briefcase. Harold looked at Eleanor. This was it. She stepped forward without waiting for permission, without looking at Patricia, without looking at the floor. She looked directly at Mr. Zhao and began speaking in Mandarin. Fluent, calm, unwavering. She repeated his own concerns back to him, word for word, exactly as he'd said them that morning, proving without any doubt she'd understood every syllable. His hand stopped halfway into the briefcase. Then she explained the clause. Joint authority on the English page. Full transfer on the page his team had been hearing all morning. 2 contracts at one table, and neither side had known it. You were not being deceived, she said. You were being mistranslated. Those are not the same thing. The room stopped breathing. Mr. Zhao's hand pulled away from the briefcase. He looked at Eleanor. Really looked, past the vest, past the spray bottle, into her eyes, at the certainty sitting there. He closed the briefcase and sat back down. Who taught you to speak like this? A library card, Eleanor said, and a mother who cleaned houses for 30 years. Silence again, heavier this time, the kind that follows something true. Mr. Zhao reached for his water glass. The first person at that table to touch one all day, drank, set it down, and said one word. Continue. For the next 40 minutes she didn't just translate words, she translated meaning, intent, the small cultural gaps that turn a sharp point into an accidental insult. Tension drained out of the room one sentence at a time. Water glasses got picked up around the table. Near the end, Mr. Zhao raised his hand and asked to speak with Harold alone. Everyone filed out. Patricia left without meeting a single person's eyes. Eleanor turned to leave too. Not you, Mr. Zhao said. Stay. In the empty boardroom, just the 3 of them now, his voice had gone slower, deliberate, the anger replaced by something closer to respect. The deal would proceed. Terms would be corrected based on the accurate translation. But he had one condition, non-negotiable. He looked only at Eleanor. She is the liaison for the remainder of this transition. No exceptions. Harold nodded once. Mr. Zhao leaned forward, voice quieter now, almost personal. I do not trust buildings. I do not trust titles. I trust people. Today she was the only person in this room who spoke to me without a mask on. Harold turned and extended his hand to Eleanor, not as employer to employee, but as one professional to another. She shook it, steady, the silver ring on her finger catching the afternoon light. When the doors opened, the hallway outside was packed. The full delegation, executives, staff who'd heard whispers and drifted closer, maintenance crew, front desk. Harold stepped out first, turned to face all of them, and said, loud enough for the whole hallway to hear, I want this on record. Today's deal was saved by Eleanor Whitfield, an employee this company nearly let walk past unseen for 11 years. That failure belongs to this building, not to her. The hallway went completely still. Mr. Zhao walked out, stopped directly in front of Eleanor in full view of everyone, and gave a small, deliberate bow. A gesture that in his language carried far more weight than any handshake. One by one, people stepped forward. A board member named Gregory Pell crossed the hall, pressed his card into her hand, said, Call my office, Monday. The young delegate from the corridor shook her hand and held it a beat too long. I knew it. The second you spoke in that hallway, I knew. Trevor Hask, the maintenance manager who'd told her last week that people like her weren't paid to have opinions, stood at the back with his head down, saying nothing at all. And at the far end of the hall, behind the front desk, Marjorie Dunleavy watched it all unfold, tears running freely down her face, both hands gripping the counter. 19 years of being reliable, of being the one nobody really noticed. This single moment made every one of them worth something. 2 weeks later, Patricia Wexler was no longer director of client relations. No dramatic scene, no announcement to the staff. She was quietly reassigned to an administrative post in a satellite office out near the airport. Fluorescent lights. No skyline, no important clients. The official file read, Conduct inconsistent with company values. Everyone who'd been in that lobby knew the real reason. She couldn't stand the fact that a 63-year-old cleaning woman had more to offer this company in 4 seconds than she'd managed in 5 years. During her final week, Patricia had to walk past a new door every single day on her way to the parking garage. A small brass plate at eye level. Eleanor Whitfield, Cultural and Linguistic Liaison, impossible to avoid. On her last afternoon, carrying a box down that same corridor, she passed Eleanor coming the other way. 3 seconds of silence. Eleanor spoke first. Calm, no bitterness in it at all. "I wish you well, Miss Wexler." Patricia said nothing. She adjusted the box in her arms and walked on, her heels growing fainter down the marble until the sound disappeared completely. That evening, alone in her new office, Eleanor opened the old notebook to the back page, unfolded the rejection letter one more time, and placed it in a small frame beside the brass nameplate on her wall. Beneath it, she taped the page with the crossed-out line. Maybe she's right. Not out of bitterness, but so she'd never forget the real danger was never being underestimated. It was almost believing the people who underestimated her. 6 months later, she completed a certification in international business mediation, tuition covered in full by the company. Mr. Zhao invited her to Shenzhen to work directly with his transition team. The first time in 63 years Eleanor Whitfield had ever boarded an airplane. A woman who taught herself 4 languages from library books and a hand-me-down phone had never once left the country that refused, for 11 years, to hear her speak. Gregory Pell connected her to a network of companies looking for cultural liaison specialists. She had 3 job offers within a month and turned all 3 down, because Eleanor Whitfield didn't want a seat at someone else's table anymore. She built her own, a small consulting firm named after her mother, the woman who cleaned houses for 30 years and never once stopped saying that language was the one thing no one could take out of your hands. Marjorie was promoted to Director of Client Relations, the very position Patricia once held. At the announcement, standing in front of the staff, she said only, "I didn't discover Eleanor. I was just the first person who stopped looking away." Eleanor used part of her company's first profits to fund a free language program at the public library branch near her old apartment, the same one where she'd sat alone some nights under fluorescent lights, with nothing but a library card and a phone with a cracked screen. She named it after her mother. So here's what I want to leave you with. Somewhere today you're going to walk past someone you've already decided you understand completely. A cleaner, a cashier, a man shoveling snow off a sidewalk in February with his head down. You'll see the uniform. You won't see what's underneath it. Maybe they speak 4 languages. Maybe they're holding a notebook nobody has ever asked to read. You will not know unless you stop, unless you ask, unless you choose. Just once to actually look. If you've ever been counted out by someone who never bothered to find out what you were carrying, tell me in the comments. And if this one landed somewhere true for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Your value was never about who happened to be watching. It's about what you kept building when nobody was.